April 6th, 1985. Barker Farm Estate Auction, Lancaster County, Nebraska. Cold morning, 38 degrees, wind cutting through jackets like a knife. The auctioneer stood on a wooden platform, looking out at the crowd of about 200 farmers packed into the muddy yard. Estate sale. Old man Barker had died in February, with no heirs who wanted the farm. Everything had to go. Land, buildings, equipment, livestock. All of it. The auction had been running since 8 a.m. By 11, they'd sold most of the good equipment, the newer tractors, the functional implements, the stuff people actually wanted. Now they were down to the junk. Lot 73, the auctioneer called out, his voice hoarse from 3 hours of calling bids. 1950 Farmall Super C, runs but needs work. Let's start the bidding at $1,500. Silence. Nobody moved. Farmers looked at their boots, shuffled their feet, crossed their arms tighter against the cold. The tractor sat there on display, 35 years old, paint so faded it looked more pink than red, rust eating through both fenders, one rear tire nearly flat, exhaust stack bent at an angle, steering wheel cracked, seat torn open with foam spilling out. It looked like junk. "All right, folks," the auctioneer tried again. "Let's get this moving. $1,000 to start us off." More silence. A farmer near the front laughed. "That thing's not worth hauling home. It's scrap metal on wheels." Another voice from the crowd. "I wouldn't take it for free. Costs more to fix than it's worth." The auctioneer sighed, wiping cold sweat from his forehead despite the temperature. "Come on now. It runs. $800. Still nothing. $600. A young man in the back raised his hand. $400. Every head in that crowd turned. The kid looked maybe 24, wore clean work clothes that seemed too new, face too smooth, hands that hadn't seen enough calluses yet. He looked like what he was, a college kid playing farmer. The auctioneer perked up, grateful for any bid at all. "We've got 400. Do I hear 5? Silence. 400 going once. Nobody moved. Going twice. A few farmers shook their heads. Sold to the young man in the back for $400. Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd. One farmer said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Fool just bought himself a $400 pile of junk." Another laughed. "Kid probably doesn't know a tractor from a riding mower." A third, "Give him a week. He'll realize what he bought and try to give it away." The young man walked forward through the crowd, ignoring the comments, and paid the auction clerk in cash, 4 crisp $100 bills. The clerk handed in the title and a receipt. The farmers watched as he backed his rusty Chevy pickup to the tractor, hooked a chain to it, and began towing it away. The Super C's flat tire thumped rhythmically as it rolled across the muddy ground. "City kid thinks farming's easy," someone muttered. "He'll learn." The young man was named David Martinez. 24 years old, grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska. His parents were both school teachers, no farming background at all. But David had studied agricultural business at the University of Nebraska in 1984 and decided he wanted to farm. Problem was, he had no land and almost no money. He'd saved $13,000 working construction jobs through college and living with his parents after graduation. $13,000. That was his entire capital to start a farming operation in the middle of the worst agricultural crisis since the Great Depression. Everyone told him he was insane. His father, "Farms are failing everywhere. Banks are foreclosing left and right. This is the absolute worst time to start farming." His college advisor, "David, be realistic. You need land, equipment, operating capital. You've got none of that. Get a job with an ag company and work your way up." His friends, "Dude, you're throwing your life away. There's no money in farming right now."
David heard all of it and disagreed with all of it. He saw the crisis differently. Crisis means opportunity, he told his skeptical father. Small farmers are struggling. They can't afford to buy and maintain equipment, but they still need their fields planted and harvested. There's a market for affordable custom farming services. I can provide that. His plan was simple. Buy old equipment cheap at auctions where nobody else wanted it. Fix it himself. He'd learned basic mechanics working construction. Offer custom farming services to small operators who couldn't afford their own equipment. Charge reasonable rates. Build a customer base. Grow from there. The Farm Hall Super C was his first purchase. $400 for a 35-year-old tractor that every experienced farmer at that auction had rejected as worthless. David towed it to the small acreage he was renting, 5 acres on the edge of Lincoln, barely enough space for a workshop and parking. His landlord, an older man named Mr. Kowalski, came out to look at the tractor as David unhitched it.
"You paid money for that?" $400, David said. Mr. Kowalski walked around the Super C slowly, taking in the rust, the flat tire, the bent exhaust, the torn seat. "Son, you got robbed. That thing's worth maybe $200 as scrap metal. You'd have been better off burning your money for heat." David just smiled. "We'll see." Mr. Kowalski shook his head and walked away, muttering about young people and their stupid decisions. David stood there in the cold April wind, looking at his $400 tractor. It was small. The Super C was one of Farmall's compact models, designed for small farms and vegetable operations. Only about 30 horsepower. Nothing impressive. But David hadn't bought it to impress anyone. He'd bought it because while everyone else saw junk, he saw something different. He saw a tool that could work if someone invested the effort to fix it. That night, David made a list in a spiral notebook. Super C Assessment and Repair Plan. Engine. Does it have compression? Can it be rebuilt? Transmission. Does it shift? Are gears damaged? Hydraulics. Do they function? Can they be repaired? Electrical. Complete rewiring probably needed. Tires. At least one replacement required. Cosmetics. Paint, seat, bodywork. Low priority. Estimated costs. Parts, $300 to $400. Tools needed, $100. Total investment, $800 to $900. Timeline, 2 weeks working evenings and weekends. Goal, functional tractor ready for spring work. First customer by May 1st. David looked at his plan and felt something he hadn't felt since graduation. Purpose. Everyone at that auction thought he was a fool. Everyone in his life thought he was making a mistake. Maybe they were right. Or maybe, just maybe, they were all wrong. David closed the notebook and looked out his window at the Super C sitting in the yard, moonlight reflecting off its faded pink paint. "Let's find out," he said to himself. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. April 7th, 1985. David woke at 5:30 a.m., drank coffee, and was in the yard by 6. He had a day job at a feed mill making $7 an hour, necessary to pay rent and bills. But before work and after work, every spare minute belonged to that tractor. He'd borrowed tools from Mr. Kowalski, a basic socket set, wrenches, screwdrivers, a grease gun. First step, complete assessment. David spent the entire first weekend, 16 hours, just evaluating what he'd bought. He circled the Super C with his notebook, writing down everything. Engine compartment. David tried turning the engine over by hand using the crank. It moved. Stiff, but it moved. That meant the engine wasn't seized, a major concern eliminated. He pulled the spark plugs. They were fouled but not damaged. The cylinders showed surface rust but no scoring. He stuck his finger in. Could still feel crosshatch pattern on the cylinder walls. Good compression when he turned it over. All 4 cylinders had resistance. The oil on the dipstick was black as tar, but not contaminated with coolant or fuel. Verdict. Engine mechanically sound. Needs fluids, cleaning, tuning, not a rebuild. Transmission. David crawled underneath, his first time ever doing this kind of work, getting intimately familiar with the tractor's underside. He manually shifted through all gears. They engaged, no grinding. The clutch moved when he pressed the pedal. He checked for leaks. Some seepage, but nothing catastrophic. Verdict, functional. Needs fluid change. Acceptable.
Hydraulics. The Super C had a basic hydraulic lift system. David moved the control lever. The lift arms raised and lowered, but slowly, very slowly. Hydraulic fluid in the reservoir was low and dirty. Verdict: system works but needs fresh fluid and possibly new seals. Usable as is from light work. Electrical. Complete disaster. Wiring was brittle, cracked, some sections completely rotted away. Battery terminals were corroded white and green. The headlights had broken lenses. Verdict: total rewire needed, not optional. Tires. 2 front tires, okay condition, held air. Right rear tire, acceptable. Left rear tire, nearly flat, sidewall cracking, dangerous. Verdict: 1 tire replacement mandatory. Cost $80 to $100. Steering and brakes. Steering was loose but functional, probably worn bushings. Brakes barely existed. Pads worn almost to nothing. Verdict: steering acceptable for now. Brakes need immediate attention for safety. After 2 days of assessment, David had his answer. The Super C wasn't junk. It was a mechanically sound tractor that had been neglected but not destroyed. Everything essential worked or could be made to work with modest investment and effort. Total estimated cost $420 in parts. Add the $400 purchase price, $820 total investment. David could afford that. Week 1. Disassembly and learning. Monday through Friday, David worked at the feed mill from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. Every evening, 5 p.m. to 10 p.m., he worked on the tractor. Weekends, dawn to dark. He started by draining everything. Engine oil came out thick and black, smelling like decades of heat and use. He caught it in old milk jugs, couldn't afford to dispose of it properly, so he'd save it and take it to a recycling center later. Transmission fluid was the same story, dark, thick, but not full of metal shavings, a good sign. Hydraulic fluid was surprisingly clean, still needed changing, but it told David the system had been maintained at some point. He pulled the air cleaner. It was packed solid with dirt and chaff, 35 years of Nebraska dust. Removed the carburetor, a simple mechanical unit, no electronics. David had never worked on a carburetor before. He borrowed a repair manual from the library and studied it for 2 hours before attempting disassembly. He laid out every part on a clean sheet, drew diagrams, labeled everything in his notebook. His landlord, Mr. Kowalski, watched from his porch one evening. "You know what you're doing, son?" "I'm learning as I go," called back. "That's a good way to ruin a tractor. Can't ruin what's already junk, right?" Mr. Kowalski had no answer for that. Week 2. Rebuilding. David ordered parts from a farm supply store. Carburetor rebuild kit, $32. 4 spark plugs, $16. Air filter, $12. Battery, $58, his biggest single expense. Electrical wire and connectors, $38. Brake pads, used from salvage yard, $35. 1 used rear tire, salvage yard, $85. Various fluids, $45. Total, $429, under budget by $91. The rebuilding process taught David more about tractors than 4 years of agricultural business classes ever had. He cleaned the carburetor jets with tiny wires, blowing compressed air through passages until they were clear. He gapped the new spark plugs precisely to .025 inches using a feeler gauge. He rewired the entire electrical system following diagrams from the library manual, learning to solder connections, wrapping everything properly. His hands got cut, scraped, burned, he dropped tools, made mistakes, had to redo things 3 times, but he kept going. On Saturday of the second week, David installed the new battery, connected the fresh wiring, and refilled all the fluids. He'd pumped grease into every Zerk fitting he could find, 48 of them total. His hands cramped from squeezing the grease gun. Sunday morning, April 21st. Moment of truth. David climbed onto the torn seat, turned the key, pulled the choke, and hit the starter. The engine cranked, once, twice, caught, coughed, sputtered.
Then smoothed into a steady 4-cylinder rhythm. The Farmall Super C was running. 35 years old, rejected by 200 farmers, bought for $400, and it ran beautifully. No smoke, no knocking, no grinding, just clean mechanical music. Mr. Kowalski came out of his house, coffee cup in hand, staring. "I'll be damned, you actually got it running." David couldn't stop smiling. "Told you it wasn't junk." "Running once is easy. Let's see if it keeps running." Over the next 3 days, David tested everything. Drove it around his 5-acre lot, shifted through all gears, smooth as butter, tested the hydraulics, lifted and lowered implements without issue, tested the brakes, marginal but functional with the new pads, checked for leaks, none. The Super C was ready, mechanically perfect, cosmetically ugly as sin, still that faded pink paint, still surface rust, still dents and scratches, still a torn seat David had covered with canvas. But David made a conscious decision. He wouldn't repaint it. If it looked too nice, people would think it was expensive. If it looked rough but ran perfect, they'd think it was a bargain. Psychology mattered. On April 25th, David placed a small ad in the Lincoln Journal-Star. Custom farming services, plowing, disking, planting, affordable rates for small operations. Call David 555-3847. Cost of the ad, $15 for 1 week. His phone number was now out there. Total investment to this point, tractor $400, parts $329, ad $15. Total $744. David had $12,256 left in savings. He needed to start earning revenue or those savings would disappear fast. The phone rang 3 days later, his first customer. Everything was about to change. April 28, 1985. The phone rang at 6:15 p.m. David grabbed it on the second ring. Hello? Is this the young man with the custom farming ad? A woman's voice, older, uncertain. Yes, ma'am, this is David Martinez. My name is Dorothy Hanson. I have 60 acres that need planting. Can you help me? David's heart raced, his first potential customer. Yes, ma'am, I can help. When would you need it done? Soon as possible. I'm in a difficult situation. David drove out to Dorothy Hanson's farm the next morning before his shift at the feed mill. She was 73 years old. Her husband had died the previous November. She had 60 acres she'd been renting to a neighbor for years, but the neighbor had just called to say he couldn't farm it this year. His own operation was failing, and he was barely holding on. Dorothy needed that land planted or she'd lose the rental income she depended on. How much would it cost? She asked, worry lines deep around her eyes. David did quick math. 60 acres, plowing, disking, planting. Big operators would charge at least $35 per acre for the full package. That would be $2,100. Dorothy probably didn't have it. $900, David said. $15 per acre. That covers everything, ground prep and planting. Dorothy's eyes widened. The big companies wanted over $2,000. I know, my prices are lower because my equipment costs are lower. Dorothy looked past David to his truck and the Super C on the trailer behind it. The tractor looked terrible. Faded pink paint, rust, dents, a torn seat David had covered with canvas. But David made a conscious decision. He wouldn't repaint it. If it looked too nice, people would think it was expensive. If it looked rough but ran perfect, they'd think it was a bargain. Psychology mattered. Can you actually do the work? She asked hesitantly. Yes, ma'am, I guarantee it. If you're not satisfied with my work, you don't pay me. Dorothy studied David's face, young, earnest, desperate to prove himself. She'd been young once, had taken chances, understood what it meant to need someone to believe in you. All right, when can you start? Tomorrow. I'll take a few days off work. They shook hands.
David spent 4 days on Dorothy Hanson's 60 acres, up at 5 a.m., working until dark. The Super C ran flawlessly. He plowed the ground first. The tractor pulled the old borrowed plow through the soil steadily, never straining, never overheating. Then disked it twice to break up clods and level everything. Finally, planted corn, borrowed a 4-row planter from another farmer who wasn't using it, paid him $50 for the week. Dorothy came out each day to check progress. The rows were straight, the depth was consistent, the work was professional. On the 4th day, David finished. Dorothy walked the field with him, looking at the freshly planted rows. "This is excellent work," she said quietly. "Better than some big operators I've hired before." David handed her the invoice. $900, like we agreed. Dorothy wrote a check with shaking hands, not from age, from relief. "Young man, you just saved me $1,200. That's the difference between keeping this place and selling it at a terrible price." She paused. "I'm going to tell everyone I know about you." And she did. The second customer, Frank Weber. Frank Weber called 5 days later. "Dorothy Hanson says you do good work cheap. That true?" "I do quality work at fair prices," David corrected. "Yes, sir. I've got 200 acres. Need it planted. How much?" $3,000. 15 per acre for full service." Silence on the line. "Big operators want 6,000, Frank finally said. "I know." "Why so cheap?" "My overhead is lower. I pass the savings to customers." "When can you start?" "Monday." Frank's 200 acres took 9 days. David worked before and after his feed mill shifts, plus all weekend. The Super C never quit, just kept running, hour after hour, pulling implements through field after field. Frank inspected the work daily, never said much, just watched. On the final day, he handed David a check for $3,000. "You're either the smartest young farmer I've met or the dumbest. Haven't figured out which yet." "Why's that?" "You're charging half what you should. You could get 25 per acre easy for this quality work." David shook his head. "Right now, I need customers more than I need maximum profit. Fair prices build trust. Trust builds a business." Frank studied him. "You might actually make it, kid." By the end of May 1985, word was spreading. David had planted 380 acres for 7 different customers. Revenue, $5,700. Expenses, fuel, equipment rental, maintenance, $820. Net profit, $4,880. In 1 month. The farmers who'd laughed at the auction started hearing stories. "You hear about that kid who bought the junk Super C? Yeah, Dorothy Hanson hired him. Says he does excellent work for half what the big guys charge. Frank Weber used him too. Frank's tight with money, wouldn't hire the kid if he wasn't good." The skepticism began shifting. Maybe the kid wasn't a fool. Maybe that junk tractor wasn't junk.
Expansion. June brought cultivation work. Farmers needed weeds controlled between corn rows. David brought a used cultivator at an estate auction for $220. Nobody else bid on it. Too old, too basic. He fixed it himself, replaced worn parts for $85. Total investment, $305. Offered cultivation services at $12 per acre. Cultivated 640 acres in June. Revenue, $7,680. Expenses, $950. Profit, $6,730. July. The competition notices. By July, David's success was affecting established operators. Henderson Custom Farming, the largest operator in Lancaster County, saw their small farm business dropping. The owner, Bill Henderson, was 58 and had been in business 30 years. At a coffee shop in Lincoln, Bill complained to other operators. "This Martinez kid is killing us. He's charging 15 per acre for planting when we charge 35. He's taking every small farmer in the county." Another operator asked, "How's he making money at those prices?" "His equipment costs nothing. He bought that old Super C for $400. We've got $500,000 in equipment loans to service." "So drop your prices. Compete." Bill tried. For 6 weeks, he matched David's rates on small operations. Lost money on every job. His equipment costs, loan payments, and overhead were too high. Matching David's prices meant operating at a loss. Bill gave up, went back to premium pricing, lost those customers permanently. August, proving them wrong. In early August, David was at the feed mill when his boss called him into the office. "Martinez, you've been taking a lot of time off." "Yes, sir. I'm running a farming business on the side." His boss, Mr. Patterson, raised an eyebrow. "You're the kid who bought that junk tractor at the Barker auction." "Yes, sir." "Everyone said you were a fool." David said nothing. Mr. Patterson leaned back in his chair. I heard you planted Frank Weber's 200 acres, Dorothy Hanson's 60, about a dozen others. That true? Yes, sir. You're making money? Yes, sir. Mr. Patterson was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, something he rarely did. I'll be damned, you actually made it work. He pulled out an envelope. This is 2 weeks severance pay. You don't need this job anymore. Go run your business full time. David stared at the envelope. Sir, Take it. You've got something going good. Don't let this job hold you back. David shook his hand. Thank you, sir. Walking out of the feed mill for the last time, David felt something shift. He wasn't a kid playing farmer anymore. He was a farmer. And that $400 tractor everyone rejected, it was about to build an empire. September 1985. David Martinez was now farming full-time. The Super C had proven itself through 5 months of constant work. Over 800 hours on the meter, not a single breakdown, just routine maintenance, oil changes, grease, filter replacements. But one tractor couldn't handle the workload David was getting. He needed more equipment, and he knew exactly where to find it. Building a fleet from rejection. September 14th, 1985. Kearney Farm Auction. David stood in the back of another crowd, watching another estate sale. Lot 42, the auctioneer called. 1968 International Harvester 656. Needs clutch work. Let's start at $3,000. Silence. $2,000? Nothing. $1,500? One farmer laughed. That clutch job costs more than the tractor's worth. The auctioneer sighed. $1,000? David raised his hand. $700. Heads turned. Some farmers recognized him now, the kid with the Super C. $700 going once, twice, sold. David bought the IH656 for $700, spent $340 on a clutch kit, and 3 days installing it himself using a borrowed manual. Total investment, $1,040. A working tractor that would retail for $4,500 if bought in good condition. October 1985. The Combine. David needed harvest equipment. At an auction in Grand Island, he found a 1964 John Deere 45 Combine. Ancient. Outdated. Nobody wanted it. Lot 67. This old Deere Combine. Who'll give me $1,500? Crickets. $1,000? David, $600. Farmers whispered. That kid again. Buying more junk. David bought it for $600, spent 2 weeks and $520 in parts getting it operational. Total investment, $1,120. By late October 1985, David had 3 pieces of equipment. 1950 Farmall Super C, $820 total investment. 1968 IH656, $1,040 total investment. 1964 JD45 Combine, $1,120 total investment. Total fleet cost, $2,980. If he'd bought equivalent equipment in good used condition, $18,000 minimum. Savings, $15,000. That capital efficiency became David's competitive advantage. First harvest season. November 1985. David offered combining services at $18 per acre. Big operators charged $35 to $40 per acre. Small farmers jumped at David's prices. He combined 420 acres in November. Revenue, $7,560. Expenses, fuel, maintenance, repairs, $1,180. Profit, $6,380. By December 31, 1985, his first full year, David's numbers looked like this. Total revenue, $32,400. Total expenses, $6,200. Net profit, $26,200. He'd started with $13,000 in March, ended the year with $39,200. Tripled his money in 9 months.
1986. Expansion. David hired his first employee in March 1986. Tommy Chen, no relation, 20 years old, dropped out of college, needed work. "You know anything about farming?" asked David. "No, but I'm willing to learn." "That's all I need. $8 an hour. I'll teach you everything." Tommy became David's right hand, learned to operate equipment, do repairs, manage customers. By May 1986, David had 5 pieces of equipment and 2 employees. Revenue that year? $87,000. Profit? $54,000.
1987. The breakthrough. In 1987, something shifted. The agricultural crisis that had been destroying farms since 1981 reached its worst point. Banks were foreclosing at record rates. Farmers were going under by the hundreds across Nebraska. But David's 43 regular customers, all small operators, were surviving. Why? Because David's affordable services kept their operating costs low enough to weather the storm. A farmer named Ed Morrison told a reporter, "I would have lost my farm in '86 if David hadn't planted my fields for half what the big operators wanted. That savings, about $4,000, made the difference between making my loan payment and defaulting." Others echoed the same story. David wasn't just running a business, he was keeping small farms alive. By late 1987, David had 11 pieces of equipment, all bought cheap, all fixed personally. 4 full-time employees, 78 regular customer farms. Revenue, $184,000. Net profit, $186,000. He was 29 years old and worth over $800,000. The key customer stories. 3 customers defined why David's business mattered. Customer 1, Dorothy Hanson. Dorothy, his first customer, hired David every year from 1985 through 1992. In 1993, at age 80, she finally sold her farm and moved to town. She'd survived the crisis, kept her land, maintained dignity. At her farewell party, she told everyone, "That young man with the old tractor saved my farm. I owed the bank and couldn't afford big operators. David charged me prices I could pay. He's why I'm selling on my terms instead of being foreclosed." Customer 2, the Martinez family, no relation to David. Jose owned 160 acres, a small operation trying to survive. In 1986, Jose's combine broke down during harvest. Repair cost, $4,800. He didn't have it. David combined Jose's entire crop for $2,880, 60% less than the repair would have cost. Jose made it that year, and the next, and the next. In 1995, Jose's son graduated from college with an agriculture degree and came home to farm. The family still farms today, 480 acres now. Jose told a documentary filmmaker in 2010, "Without David, we would have lost everything in '86. That one harvest made the difference." Customer 3, Robert and Linda Hayes. The Hayes family farmed 240 acres. Both worked town jobs to supplement farm income. From 1986 through 1990, they used David's services exclusively, saved approximately $37,000 over 5 years versus hiring big operators. That $37,000 let them make loan payments through the worst years. By 1995, they'd paid off the farm completely. Robert later said, "We survived because David kept our costs manageable. Simple as that." 1991 to 1995. The final growth. By 1991, David incorporated as Martinez Agricultural Services, bought 120 acres for equipment storage and a proper shop, hired 15 employees, expanded services to include equipment repair for other farmers. Revenue in 1995, $1.9 million. Net profit, $623,000. David was 34 years old and worth approximately $3.2 million. All built on a foundation of rejected equipment that nobody else wanted.
The Super C was still in his fleet, now with 8,900 hours. Original engine still running. David used it for light work and as a reminder. This tractor launched everything, he told employees. Never forget that what everyone rejects might actually be valuable. By 1995, the agricultural crisis had passed. Commodity prices recovered. Land values stabilized. David's customers, the small farmers who'd survived with his help, were thriving now. And the business that started with a $400 tractor nobody wanted had become a multi-million-dollar operation. Everyone who'd laughed at that auction in 1985 knew the story by now. The kid had been right. The crowd had been wrong. The rejected tractor wasn't junk. It was the foundation of an empire. By 2000, Martinez Agricultural Services was the largest custom farming operation in 3 counties. David was 39 years old, worth approximately $5.6 million. He'd accomplished everything he'd set out to do, and more. But the numbers didn't tell the real story. The real story was in the farms that survived. The Crisis Retrospective. In 2005, a graduate student from the University of Nebraska named Jennifer Walsh interviewed David for her thesis on the 1980s farm crisis. She asked him a question that made him stop and think. Mr. Martinez, of your original customers from 1985 through 1990, the small farmers you worked with during the worst years, how many are still farming today? David pulled out old customer lists and started counting. Of his original 78 regular customers from that period, 71 were still farming in 2005. 71 out of 78, a 91% survival rate. Jennifer's eyes widened. Do you know what the average survival rate was for small farms in Nebraska during that period? No. 43%. More than half failed. David sat back in his chair, absorbing that. Your customers survived at more than twice the average rate, Jennifer continued. Why? David thought about it carefully. I kept their operating costs low. That gave them breathing room. A farmer paying me $15 per acre for planting instead of $35 per acre saved $20 per acre. On 200 acres, that's $4,000. For a struggling farmer in 1985, $4,000 was often the difference between making a loan payment and defaulting. Jennifer nodded, taking notes. So your business wasn't just about providing a service, it was about survival. I didn't think of it that way at the time. I was just trying to build a business. But looking back, yeah, that's what it was. 2000, retirement decision. In 2008, David turned 47. Martinez Agricultural Services had 32 employees, $3.8 million in annual revenue, 247 regular customer farms, 42 pieces of equipment. David was tired. 23 years of dawn to dark work, 23 years of stress, 23 harvest seasons. His daughter, Maria, was graduating from UNL with an ag degree. His son, Lucas, was studying business management. Neither wanted to farm. Maria wanted to work for an ag tech company. Lucas wanted to move to Denver. David understood. Farming wasn't for everyone. He put the business up for sale. In November 2008, he sold Martinez Agricultural Services to a regional agricultural corporation for $7.4 million. David retired at 47 with a net worth of $8.1 million. Not bad for a kid who'd started with $13,000 and a $400 tractor.
The Super C's final years. When David sold the business, he kept one piece of equipment, the 1950 Farmall Super C, the tractor that had launched everything. It was 58 years old now, had 11,400 hours on it, original engine, never rebuilt, never replaced, just maintained. David couldn't bring himself to include it in the sale. This tractor means more to me than money, he told the buyers. It's not for sale. He took it home to his property, 20 acres outside Lincoln, where he'd built a house and shop.
For the next 4 years, David maintained the Super C meticulously, started it monthly, ran it around his property, kept it in perfect mechanical condition. People would ask why he kept it. Nostalgia, they'd suggest? No, David would say. Reminder. Of what? That everyone can be wrong, that young fools sometimes see things experts miss, that the thing everyone rejects might be exactly what you need. 2012, the museum. In March 2012, the Great Plains Agricultural Museum in Lincoln contacted David. They were expanding their exhibits on the 1980s farm crisis and wanted to include stories of survival and innovation. "We've heard about your tractor," the curator said, "the one you bought at auction in 1985. Would you consider donating it?" David visited the museum, saw their facilities, talked to the staff. "If I donate it," David said, "I want the story told correctly, not just old tractor, but what it represented, what it did." "Absolutely. We'll create a full exhibit around it." On April 6, 2012, exactly 27 years after he'd bought it, David donated the Super C to the museum. They placed it in the main hall under spotlights, kept the original faded pink paint, kept the surface rust, kept the dents, left the canvas seat cover David had put on in 1985. The plaque read, "1950 Farmall Super C, purchased at Barker Estate Auction, April 6, 1985 for $400. Rejected by every farmer present as worthless junk." This tractor launched Martinez Agricultural Services, helped 78 small farms survive the 1980s agricultural crisis, operated for 27 years, 11,400 hours on the original engine, donated by David Martinez, 2012. Sometimes the thing everyone rejects is exactly what you need to build something remarkable. Standing ovation, 5 minutes. People crying. Farmers bringing their grandchildren forward to touch the tractor. "That machine helped save our farm," one old farmer told his grandson, "helped us survive when we had nothing." The legacy. After 5 years at the museum, the Super C became their most popular exhibit, more photographed than rare tractors worth 10 times as much. Why? The story. People connected with the idea that something rejected could become something valuable, that young dreamers could be right when experts were wrong, that perseverance and perspective mattered more than money or credentials. School groups toured the museum. Teachers used the Super C as a lesson. Everyone thought it was worthless. One young man saw its value. That perspective changed his life and saved dozens of farms. The curator told a reporter in 2018, "We have tractors that are rarer, more expensive, in better condition, but none resonate like the Super C. It represents hope, second chances, the power of seeing differently." By 2020, the exhibit had been viewed by an estimated 180,000 visitors. The Super C, rejected, mocked, dismissed as junk, had become a symbol of vision, of persistence, of believing in yourself when nobody else does, of looking past rust to see potential. David visited the museum occasionally, would stand and watch visitors read the plaque, see their faces change as they understood the story. A young woman, maybe 25, approached him once. "Are you David Martinez, the one who bought this tractor?" "I am." "I'm starting a business. Everyone says I'm crazy, that it won't work, that I should get a real job." She looked at the Super C. "But this gives me hope. If you could build something from a $400 tractor nobody wanted, maybe I can build something too." David smiled. "You can. Don't let others decide what's valuable. Trust yourself." She thanked him and walked away. David watched her go, thinking about that April morning in 1985. Cold wind, muddy auction yard, a crowd of farmers laughing at him. If he'd listened to them, none of this would have happened. The business, the survival of those farms, this legacy. All because he'd looked at a rejected tractor and seen possibility.
David Martinez is 63 years old now. The Great Plains Agricultural Museum still displays the Farmall Super C in the main hall. 74 years old. Still runs. The museum fires it up once a month for demonstrations. The engine that everyone said was worthless in 1985 still purrs like it's new. David visits several times a year, sits on a bench across from the exhibit, watches people discover the story. Last month, a father brought his teenage son to see it. The kid looked at the faded paint, the rust, the dents. "Dad, why is this junky tractor in a museum?" The father read the plaque aloud, the whole story. The rejection, the $400 purchase, the business it launched, the farms it saved. When he finished, the kid was quiet. So everyone thought it was worthless. Everyone. But it wasn't. No, it just needed someone who could see past the surface. The kid looked at the tractor differently now, touched the faded paint like it was sacred. David watched from his bench, smiling. That's why the story mattered. Not the business success, not the money, the lesson, the broader truth. David has been asked to speak at agricultural conferences, business schools, even high school career days. He always tells the same story, always ends the same way. In April 1985, 200 farmers looked at that Super C and saw junk. I looked at it as a tool that could work if someone invested effort. We were looking at the same tractor, same rust, same dents, same age, but we saw different things. He pauses for effect. They saw what was wrong with it. I saw what was right with it. They saw the end of its usefulness. I saw the beginning of its potential. They trusted conventional wisdom. I trusted my own assessment. That difference in perspective, that's what changed everything.
The question David gets asked most: would you do it again? If you could go back to 1985, knowing what you know now, would you still buy that tractor? David always answers immediately, every time, without hesitation. But why? You could have bought newer equipment, built the business faster, made more money. David shakes his head. You're missing the point. That tractor taught me something no business school could teach. It taught me to trust my own vision when everyone else disagrees, to see value where others see waste, to understand that conventional wisdom is often just conventional, not wisdom. He leans forward. If I'd bought new equipment, I would have built a business, maybe a successful one, but I wouldn't have learned the most important lesson of my life, that crowds can be wrong, that young fools sometimes see things experts miss, that rejected doesn't mean worthless. That lesson was worth more than the business, worth more than the money. It shaped how I saw every decision afterward. The final wisdom. David was recently asked by a documentary filmmaker, "What do you want people to take away from your story?" He thought for a long moment. 3 things. First, don't judge by appearance. The Super C looked like junk. It was mechanically perfect. Most valuable things in life are like that, rough on the surface, solid underneath. Learn to see past the surface. Second, don't let the crowd make your decisions. 200 experienced farmers rejected that tractor. They were wrong. Trust your own assessment, especially when it goes against conventional wisdom. Third, rejected doesn't mean worthless. Sometimes the thing everyone rejects is exactly what you need. The trick is having the vision to see it and the courage to act on that vision. David stood up from the bench, walked over to the Super C, put his hand on the faded pink hood. This tractor saved farms, built a business, changed my life, all because I looked at it differently than everyone else. He turned to face the camera. So here's my challenge to you. What are you rejecting in your life that might actually be valuable? What opportunity are you dismissing because it doesn't look right? What tool, person, or idea is everyone telling you to ignore? Maybe they're right. Maybe it really is junk. Or maybe, just maybe, they're wrong. And the only way to find out is to trust yourself enough to look closer. April 6th,
2025 will mark 40 years since David bought the Super C. The museum is planning a special anniversary event. David will be there, telling the story one more time. The story of a rejected tractor and a young farmer who saw what nobody else could. The story of building an empire from $400 and vision. The story of 78 farms that survived because someone looked past rust to see potential. But most importantly, the story of a lesson that transcends farming. See value where others see waste. Trust your assessment when others doubt. Look past surface to structure. And never, ever let the crowd tell you what's possible. The Farm Hall Super C sits in that museum today, 40 years after being rejected, proving that story true. Still running, still teaching, still changing lives. One rejected tractor, one young farmer, one moment of vision. That's all it took to change everything. The crowd was wrong. The young fool was right. The rejected tractor wasn't junk. It was treasure waiting for someone who could see it. And that makes all the difference.